Essentially, and in very basic terms, oil and grease do the same thing. They might look very different, but they are both lubricants used to reduce the friction caused by metal rubbing against metal. So if they both do the same job, which one do you need? Do you need oil or grease? I'm Ollie, this is Simply Stitchy. In today's video, I'm going to be looking at the answer to that question. And before we get into whether you should be using oil or grease, we need to take a look at what the differences are between the two lubricants. This is stainless lily white sewing machine oil. As you can see, sloshing about inside the bottle, a liquid at room temperature. Grease is essentially oil, only it's got added ingredients that make it a solid at room temperature. The reason for that difference is that oil and grease are used to lubricate different parts of machinery. Oil tends to be used in areas that get a lot of friction and that get hot from the get-go, like the bobbin area in your sewing machine, for instance, or the needle bar as the needle goes up and down. That's what you use oil for. And there are other areas as well. Grease, on the other hand, it's designed for areas that don't get hot straight away or just don't get that hot. And the idea is, because this is a solid, the length of time it takes for the piece of machinery to get hot matches the length of time it takes the grease to melt. So the grease has melted when the machine needs the lubricant in order to cool down. Grease is also used in areas that don't necessarily need lubricating that often. The one key thing with grease is once you've put it on there, it tends to stay because it isn't runny. The simple answer, whether you use oil, grease or a mixture of both, depends on what your sewing machine is and how old it is. For the purposes of this video, I'm not going to be covering machines that look like this one or this one. These are modern machines and they're actually designed to be self-oiling, or they get a top-up of lubricant when they go in for their annual service. For this video, I'm going to be focusing on machines like this one. There are some areas on your sewing machine, like gears for instance, that you can't oil, and for that you need grease, and there's various different types of grease that people have been known to use on sewing machines. The first one we're going to look at is this one. This is Singer lubricant, and it's the modern equivalent to the lubricants that would have been around when your vintage and antique sewing machines were brand new. It's not quite as good as the original, but it'll get you by, and it is designed for sewing machines, so it's slightly less problematic to use it. Other grease include Petroleum Jelly, and there's another one here. This one's non-fragrance. Petroleum Jelly has been around since the late 1800s when it was invented by Robert Cheeseborough. Originally it would have been a mixture of paraffin wax and mineral oils, and it was introduced to treat damaged skin. He started producing it in Brooklyn under a name that we're all familiar with today, Vaseline. These days Vaseline is a brand name that's registered to Unilever. And although modern Vaseline is a bit more refined than back in the 1800s, the product is essentially the same thing. It's a jelly made from petroleum byproducts. There's some interesting articles on Vaseline and the history behind the product on Unilever's website and on the website for Vaseline, and I'll put a link to all of that in the description box below so you can go and check it out further. What I found interesting on both of those websites is it didn't mention sewing machines once. Nowhere. Not at all. It was like sewing machines weren't even thought about when they put those pages together. And I haven't found any information about sewing machines, any information about non-branded petroleum jelly. Now there might have been once, way back in the day when these older machines were brand new. But times change. Modern day petroleum jelly has been tweaked over the years. Take this one for instance. See what it says there? Cocoa butter. If you use this to grease your sewing machine, you're greasing it with cocoa butter. Why would you want to put cocoa butter in your sewing machine? For me, using petroleum jelly, especially modern day petroleum jelly, on your sewing machine is a no-no. It's right up there with baby oil. The problem with this particular jelly, petroleum jelly designed for humans, is the melting point is a lot lower than it needs to be for a sewing machine. This melts at body temperature, which is what, 37 degrees centigrade, 98 degrees Fahrenheit. And that's because it's designed to be a moisturiser. Oh gosh, smell the cocoa butter in that. It's pretty much liquid as soon as it hits your skin, see? Which isn't what your sewing machine needs, which means you're going to have the lubricant dropping off the machine before the machine's got up to temperature and needs to use it. And it needs that lubricant to stay where you've put it while it's working, so it can actually benefit from the lubrication. When this stuff cools down, just like any grease, it will resort back to a solid. And if it's fallen off the bits of your sewing machine that you actually wanted to lubricate with it, where is it solidifying? Seriously, why would you use petroleum jelly? Ugh, I'm covered in it now. Ugh. There's this stuff. This is molybdenum grease. Molybdenum grease, also known as molly grease, and I can perfectly understand why they chose to shorten the name on that one. This is a heavy duty grease, and it's used in areas where you've got metal on metal, things like bearings, gears, that kind of thing. I have used molly grease on vintage and antique sewing machines before now, but I am particularly careful on the area that I tend to use it on. I've used it on areas like here, the pivot spring on bobbin winders, because I know once I've cleaned that area and lubricated it, I'm not going to be taking that off again anytime soon. And I know that the grease in there is just going to stay. It's not going to come in contact with the rubber of the bobbin tyre, and there's no plastic to worry about. But what I do try to stick with is the silicone grease, because I know that this one is going to be safe for the slightly newer machines that might contain things like plastic gears, particularly if they're modern plastic gears. They're made from nylon. It's see-through, transparent, and it's quite a bit lighter than the last grease we looked at. That isn't a full list of the grease out there. I mean, there's also other grease that people have been known to use on sewing machines. One such grease is Triflow. Now, Triflow wasn't really designed for use on sewing machines either as an oil or a grease. I covered more about the Triflow lubricant in this video, the one about what sewing machine oil you should use on your sewing machine. Now, I personally don't go near Triflow when I'm working on my sewing machines, because it was actually a product designed for bicycles, pretty much like the 3-in-1 oil that everybody used on everything that was made of metal way back in the 70s, and then found out that it actually damaged sewing machines. So Triflow isn't something that I touch with a barge pole when I'm working on my machines. The original Singer lubricant used on vintage and antique sewing machines hasn't been available for decades, and it's hard to find the modern equivalents. So it's good news that the Featherweight Shop formulated a grease specifically for use on vintage and antique sewing machines, and it's called Retro Grease. Now, originally they formulated it for the machines that they work on the most, which is the Singer Featherweights, but you can actually use this grease on any vintage or antique sewing machine that has all metal gears and ports on the motors, like this Singer 66. Her name's Robin, and she's from the 1940s. If we take a closer look at the back of Robin for a minute, she has a particular style of Singer motor that has two little lubricating points at either end. Now, these aren't oil points. You can't put oil in these motors because you'll just burn them out. These are actually grease ports. I'll put a link in the description box below for you, and that'll take you to the Featherweight Shop webpage where you can get some of that retro grease, and I highly recommend that you do actually use that one, because it is specifically formulated for use on these old style sewing machines. Now, a lot of people complain that the So Retro grease is actually a bit on the pricey side, but when you think about what you get with the package, you don't just get the grease, you get instructions that tell you how or where to actually use the grease. You also get a handy little gizmo that can clean out what's on your motor so that you can get the new grease in. But more than that, even this stuff, this tube I've had for eons. It actually lasts a long time, and you'll find that So Retro grease, you only need to use a little bit of it at a time. It'll last for ages, so the price of it is actually not that bad. There are a couple of reasons why I always recommend that you stick with products that were actually designed for use with vintage and antique sewing machines. The first reason is the fact that if it was designed for that particular product, it's going to work better with that product. The second reason is you're less likely to cause damage to that vintage or antique sewing machine if the product will actually work in the way that that sewing machine needs it to. And that's why I recommend that if you do need grease on your sewing machine, that you stick with So Retro. Here's a handy video on the Featherweight Shop's website that shows them demonstrating the different melting points of the different grease that gets used on sewing machines, and I do highly recommend that you actually go and check that out as well, so I'll put a link to that in the description box. This video isn't sponsored by the Featherweight Shop, and I'm not affiliated to them in any way. I just happen to think that So Retro grease is actually the best grease that you could possibly use. I hope you liked today's video, and I hope it's helped you work out whether you should be using sewing machine oil and grease on your vintage or antique Singer sewing machine. If you did like the video, give it a thumbs up, and why not support the channel by donating through the super thanks button that's just below this video screen. You could also subscribe and click that little bell so that YouTube can let you know when I've uploaded another video. And why not check out some of the other videos that I've got on the channel using these links coming up on the screen any minute now, or the ones I'll pop in the description box. And while you're in the description box, you can also check out my Amazon store. I'm an Amazon affiliate, and on that store I've got useful links to items for sewing related activities as well as maintaining sewing machines. There'll also be a link in the description to where you can buy So Retro grease. Whichever video you do go and check out next, I hope to see you back here for the next one, and in the meantime, whatever you're sewing it with, embrace your creativity and have fun. Thank you ever so much for watching. I'll see you next time. Bye for now.